Good morning, Meenu. Thank you, first of all, to take out the time and agreeing to this interaction with the Tech Mahindra Foundation Samvaad team. We are really grateful to you for taking out time.
Thank you, Prachi. It's my pleasure to be here and to be talking to all of you wonderful people. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Meenu. As you know, Samvaad is our quarterly newsletter that we circulate to our internal and external stakeholder. And every edition is theme-based. We try to focus on areas that are close to the MF's mandate. And in this edition, we wanted to explore marginalized gender perspective, particularly women and transgender. We've done some researches and found out that World Bank estimates show India has one of the lowest female labor participation rates in the world, which was very, very disheartening.
Very sad, yes.
Very, very sad. And we realized that, it means that less than 1/3 of women aged 15 years or older, they're particularly looking for job or they don't have job. And this is all despite all the effort and policy support, the female labor force participation. It's mostly hovering around 20% for several decades now. And we know that you are doing some exemplary work in the field of women empowerment through Azad Foundation and Sakha Caps. So we thought through this conversation, we will be able to capture some new ideas and perspective for women beneficiaries we work, as well as women in TMF. So today's conversation, my colleague Shorni will be taking on. So over to you, Shorni, for a much enriching interaction with me.
Again, a warm welcome. So I'll just go to the questions directly. So firstly, to set the context, let's start with a broad question. After having spent so many years in this space, what is your take on the gender discourses in the social development sector? How much progress have we really made in real terms?
That, Shorni, that is a question which can take forever to respond. And at the same time, the very, very brief response to it can be that, of course, there has been movement. One cannot deny that the kind of opportunities that are available to women, marginalized women, trans women, people of all genders is more, relatively speaking, than what it was, let's say, 10, 15 years ago, even that. And yes, there have been, progressive laws put in place and so on and so forth. However, if I was to sum up where the gender discourse is, I would say that I feel personally very concerned that we are, I don't know whether we are moving ahead or we are slipping back, because the kind of backlash that women's rights, the gender rights, that the rights of trans persons, movements has been getting, the kind of overall environment within which we live is one very, very threatening to our rights, to the to rights of women. It is, as Prachi said in the beginning, it is very, very disappointing that we continue to be almost like 154th position in the gender gap index or something like that, some ridiculous number, something from the bottom, like bottom 5th, 6th or whatever. I was in a workshop recently and there was a participant from Kyrgyzstan, which is like such a tiny country of almost 70 lakh population. They ranked 12th in the gender gap index, so it's totally incomprehensible to me that this is such a serious issue, and it is serious not just because more women should be in the workforce, but because this indicator is reflective of the deep divisions that continue in our society on the basis of gender and all these various structural axes. And it is not an issue. It is not an issue for policymakers. It is not an issue for elections. It is not an issue on the basis of which we vote. So it sometimes, kind of puts me in despair. But yeah, but I cannot negate the fact that the life opportunities that are available to you and me today are different from. I would say a minuscule population, but yes, the opportunities have changed.
Just coming to the next question, since we are discussing the gender perspective, Sakha cab drivers are now synonymous with women empowerment initiatives in India. Was this something you envisaged during the initial phase of Azad Foundation? It would be great to hear from you about the early days of these two organizations, the challenges you faced and the successes you achieved.
Right. Well, I'm honored to hear that that Sakha Cabs is synonymous with women's empowerment in India. I mean, I definitely feel that think that that is the objective with which we started the initiative. And if I look at Sakha, I think I still feel very much that we are in our initial years because the struggles continue since Sakha is the one which is interfacing with the market and is often at the receiving end of all kinds of policy changes. So whether it was the demonetization or the introduction of GST or the policy changes in terms of how long you can have vehicles on the road, changes in the licensing, all. I think being in the market, you learn that all of this political, legal kind of environment impacts you every single day, and to compete in the market with other players who are, who are playing with a different set of rules is continues to be a big challenge. And what do I mean by that? For example, in the market, the majority of the people in the transport industry, whether it is aggregators or whether it is individual cab players, do not actually go with the principle of providing full-time employment to drivers. That's not part of the business model. The business model is about leasing out, contracting, taking a certain percentage of their earnings, etc. And our experience and learning with women drivers has been that they come from such vulnerable backgrounds and from so much of deprivation in that sense and denial of their basic entitlements, etc. That they have a very low risk appetite to get into entrepreneurial mode. That is one. The other is the kind of the responsibilities that all women actually have, which is really unpaid care work. But maybe some of us have the option of hiring domestic help, which marginalized women do not have. So they have to take care of everything at home, childcare, care of the elderly, and all the regular work that happens. So given that, it is very difficult for majority of those women to get into those kinds of work relationships where they are not assured of a basic minimum salary at the end of the month. So Sakha has been following a different model right from the beginning, where women drivers are salaried employees with Sakha, with their social security benefits. And I feel that that might be the reason why today, despite being so tight on our budgets and such a bootstrapped company, that we would still perhaps have the largest fleet of women drivers in the country. The reason why the large aggregators and others, even though they now understand that hiring women, drivers is good for business because they have a large percentage of customer profile is that of females and children who are using their services. But so I think those are that is a turf that we still need to kind of overcome. On the Azad side, I think, yes, the initial years were difficult, mostly because one has to prove oneself. There was no similar kind of initiative in place. But once we were able to establish proof of concept, Azad has had a relatively, easier time in terms of expanding its work, taking on, more partners, more projects. So today it's starting from one training center in Delhi. It is now working in Delhi, Jaipur, Kolkata, and Chennai, and has worked in partnership in other cities as well. The challenge in particular that Azad continues to face is that the whole understanding of what it takes, to skill to help a woman get skilled and employed is, we feel, not really uh, there in the larger discourse.
Coming to my next question, if we were to talk specifically about employability, the space you have been most associated with, even in this day and age, the female labor force participation in urban India is abysmally low at just about 18%. From your grounds up perspective, what are the key measures required to increase this participation? Where are we going wrong?
We are going wrong is that I think we do not understand the problem. We expect that women will be given skills and they will enter the workforce, and just like you have men, you will have women. We do not understand that there are structural factors, discrimination, which stops women firstly from coming into a workforce. And once she is there, she's kind of working with one hand tied behind the back, because her male colleagues, they do not have the same unpaid care work responsibilities that the women have. In addition, a large 1 in 3 women, as per the UN report, in the world handle violence. And we know the statistics in our country. And we know that 90% of the violence and crimes against women are actually within her family or community. And we know, for example, that during the COVID, the domestic violence, we all know it, we call it the shadow pandemic. So given that reality of domestic violence, we have to assume that 1 in 3 women in any workforce will be handling that at home.
You talk about the shadow pandemic, which brings us to the next question. How do we address the core problem of discrimination and the abuse of women in the workplace?
Very often, the whole thing about discrimination and abuse of women at the workplace gets reduced to merely sexual harassment at workplace. I think sexual harassment at workplace is an important thing to address, and it needs to be addressed. But there is it's part of a wider discrimination that gets practiced against women, marginalized women. When I say marginalized women, I'm talking of women from, Dalit women, women from minorities, disabled women, trans women, all the entire spectrum of people who would identify themselves to be a woman, cis or trans or whatever, however we would like to define it. And there is a huge amount of discrimination against all of them in terms of our attitudes, in terms of our openness, our even understanding of how to work with them. So very often for trans women, the opportunities just don't exist. So the discrimination and abuse has to be fought at every level, and it requires, I think, the other. Very often, I feel what we end up doing is we end up working in silos. So there are those organizations which have done a huge amount of work on violence against women. There are those organizations which have done a huge amount of work on education, on health, on livelihoods, but the dots just don't connect. And the women, the marginalized women, whichever part of the spectrum they fall on, they are not looking. One input is not going to be enough to help them transform their life conditions. So we need to. I understand that one organization cannot be doing everything, but that is where we need to work together. We need to work in collaborations. We are, almost like our gender identity. I think we build a sectoral identity. It becomes, we get very attached to that.
Now, so Tech Mahindra Foundation, as you're aware, mainly works with education and employability. I would like to know your perspective that what kind of initiatives and strategies would you recommend for an organization, a CSR organization like ours, uh, who are also working for gender equality?
I would say, like now, if I say this, from the other side of the table, that so one is that you should be prepared to invest long and invest deep. So things don't happen in a day, 2, 3 months, 6 months. It takes time, and I think you should be prepared to, like I said, invest in not just skill training, but also all that is required to ensure access to such programs. So which is, without that work, even I would say that even after a woman has received employment, and we have many case studies to give evidence for that, the violence at home or the violence of intimate partner, it may be boyfriend or whoever, is one of the biggest factors which stops them from taking up jobs. We have had lovely drivers who have gained great skills and driven with confidence, but when it comes to work, these are the issues that come. So, and it's really strange, that when women have gone through a process of empowerment, the violence that they meet on the road or in public spaces, mostly they are able to take care of it because they have been able to empower themselves. It is the violence in their personal lives that continues to drag them down. So there is a need to invest in, even post-employment, in support such as counseling services, just maybe information services where they can go to find help for violence, or supportive infrastructure like some safe spaces for them, or legal support, and those. So that is a gamut of services that I think as a CSR you should think of if you want to look at the issue of livelihoods, employment, and employability, particularly for marginalized women.
Agree completely, Meenu. I think collaboration is the key between corporate foundations and NGOs. We are doing our own thing, but the pandemic has shown that going forward, we have to come together to ideate, to have discourses such as this, and to collaborate. Which brings me to the last question. What is your message for youngsters who are contemplating a career in the social sector in recent times? Apart from the educational qualifications, what skill sets do organizations like yours look for in prospective job seekers?
Very good question, I think. The last one, I think I feel that, in today's time, there is a bit too much premium being put on quote unquote professional skills. I think it's very important to have professional skills. It's very important to have a professional attitude and all of that, particularly when dealing with the various accountabilities and statutory responsibilities and donor responsibilities. It's important to have, for example, people who can write reports, who can deal with external stakeholders, etc., etc. But I think what we are missing out on is the patience and the openness to actually learn from work on the ground, to spend time with marginalized communities, and to understand.
Patience is a virtue, and that is something that the present generation should kind of keep in mind. And of course, being immersed in the development sector, if they've made a conscious decision to join the development sector. These are so important. I'm done with my questions. Over to you, Prachi, for the concluding remarks.
Thank you, Shruti. That was a pleasure talking to you.
Absolute pleasure.
So, Meenu, I mean, it's note interaction turned out to be more like a master class, like, we thought. So it was amazing to hear your thoughts on different aspects. And, particularly while on the onset, we started with a very gloomy picture of where we are vis-a-vis the international stats. But I think these are the hope pictures that you presented to us with respect to your own work and what can be done is something that is motivating enough for all of us and for particularly for the segment and sector. What I'm taking personally, few things that you said, which really, really made an impact to me today. One is like, identifying recognition of discrimination at all the levels. We still have a very skewed picture, very, with the blinders, horse blinders, we are looking at discrimination, but we probably have to push ourselves to see at what all levels. After the recognition, we have to invest long and deep, whether it is, private sector, whether it is from the government side or from, from the civil societies. I think we have to invest long and deep. I'm also taking away when you said more networking across the domains and sector is needed, because there are people who are more passionate, but unfortunately resources are less, and there are people who have resources. So so it's like networking on all the sides which is needed. And ultimately I think it's also about creating that social capital for, say, half of the population of India and globally. So there are so many things that we are taking away, Meenu. So thank you from the entire Samvaad team from our side, and lovely interacting with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prachi. It is my privilege to be here and to be talking to all of you. And I must say that you made the talking very easy.